Hello, I'm Li Hao. So in the previous videos, we talked about module bundlers. And I explained that in 3 different levels. If you haven't watched that video, links in the corner and in the description. So please go and watch that. After that videos, we talked through examples of module bundlers. We talk about Webpack, Rollup, ESBuild, and Vite. So again, if you want to watch them, links in the description as well. I know there's a lot more module bundlers out there that we didn't cover, but hopefully these 4 module bundlers that we talk about give you a sense, and hopefully you find a pattern through them. They all go through these 3 phases when they do bundling, which is to resolve, to transform or load, and then to bundle the code. Now it's time for us to actually go in and take a look at each individual stages. Right, so today we're going to talk about resolving. There's a lot of things to talk about resolving. So in this video, we are going to give you a brief idea of what is resolving and things to note about the mental model that you should have about resolving. Right? And in the upcoming videos, what we're going to do is we are going to take a look at resolving in particular with the bundlers that we talked about previously. Right? So we're going to go in and take a look at, say, what does resolving meant to Rollup, Webpack, Vite, and ESBuild, and how do we configure the resolving options for resolving? How do we do customization in terms of resolving for these different bundlers out there? And as we mentioned in all the bundlers video, all of them allow some form of plugins. So this is not going to cover in this video, but in future videos, we're going to talk about how we can write a resolver plugins for each of these different bundlers. Okay? And to make it interesting, if we have enough likes in this video, and I'm going to set a target, if we reach 200 likes, okay? I never have any videos that's 200 likes. I think that's achievable. If we get 200 likes in this video, we're going to explore how we write our own resolver. So we're going to ditch whatever resolver that's come from the bundlers. We pass in our custom resolver and do all the resolver from our own. So that is what we're going to try. Okay, we're going to try to write our own resolver that handles all kind of scenario. And we have test cases to test through them. So that if we get 200 likes in this video, we're going to explore that. Okay, deal? So back to this video. To this video, we're going to talk about resolving and the high-level ideas. Okay, so what is resolving? Well, resolving is to try to answer this question, this ultimate question for resolving, which is, where's the location to load the content I'm trying to import? Where? So this statement itself, this question itself, have a few parts. So let's break them down. So the first part is what I'm trying to import. What does that mean? What I'm trying to import, it depends on what kind of modules that I am having right now. So in JavaScript modules, in JavaScript, these statements, the import statements for ES modules, require statement for CommonJS, or define function, the statement function for AMD. This signifies that it's trying to import something. Depends on what kind of module system is there. You have different way of expressing it. So for import, for ES modules, you use the import statements to say, okay, I want to import something from where, right? So these are what you want to import. I want to import /component/button. I want to import Lodash. I want to import /model. I want to import /assets/strings.json, as well as jQuery and my module. So this is what I want to import. And for CSS, it's slightly different. You have different syntax for CSS. So when you have CSS and you have this kind of statements, say add import or URL in places like background image, then these are the things that you want to import. So the resolving is not about how to read through a file and figure out what you need to import. No, I'm not talking about that. I'm just talking about, just by looking at this, you have another function and figure out that extract out these strings, navigation.css and paper.gif, and the thing that resolver needs to answer is that based on this, these two are what I want to import, right? Based on this, what I want to import, I need to figure out where. That is the second part of the question. Where's the location? Where? So the key of this question is where, and the answer of this question is, well, we're going to find out based on the resolver. And the type of the answer is a string that is an address to the location. So it could be any of this, right? It could be a file location that is, a full path location. Or in Windows, you have a different kind of format for the location in your file system. So it's either a location in a file system, or it could be also a remote location. It could be a CDN URL, right? It's just like where. You need a location to tell you like where's the address. The last part of this statement is where's the location to load the content, right? But this loading of the content is gonna be handled on a later part, which is a question and answer for another day, right? So that's not within the scope of the resolving, right? So the resolving is just getting like what I'm trying to import and figure out where's the location, right? So it does not answer the question of how do we extract what needs to be imported, and also it does not handle like once we figure out where to import, it does not answer the question of how do we load the content from that address, right? Those are different stages. That's like before resolving and after resolving, but resolving is just finding, based on what I want to import, where is the location. So based on the example that we've seen just now, this is what I want to import. And these are the locations where, for the modules that I want to import. Right, so resolver, if we formalize it, is a function that takes in what you want to import as an input, and the output of this function is where's the location. So it looks something like this. It's a function. However, it's not the complete picture, right? So let me show you an example. If I have these three statements, import button from ./button.js, or import button from ./button.js, or import button ./button.js, right? Almost the same, right? A little bit different, but take a look at these three different statements. Can you tell me, are all the buttons the same? Are they trying to import from the same place? Think about it. Well, we don't know, okay? Honestly, I don't know. You can't tell from this alone because you don't know where this statement is. If you take a look over here, now you realize, now you have a bit more context about like where this statement is written in, which module is this statement from. Now with this, you know that actually the first two are actually importing from the same module. So they are resolving to the same location. The resolver function should return the same output. But for the third statement, although the statement looks exactly the same as the first statement, but actually it's resolved to a different location. This is a lib button, right? So it's different folder. What does that leave us, right? Which means that the function, the resolver function that we had just now, it says needs one more input, which is where you are importing from. Oftentimes in different module bundles, they have a different name for it. It could be the importer, the place that you want to import something from, and the import T, which is the string that you request for. And when I say request, it could be a requester, the module that tries to request for something, and then the request itself, right? The import, the string itself. So I guess we kind of concluded that resolver is a function that gives us a location based on where we are and what we are looking for. But we haven't figured out what is in the resolver function. Like, what are the steps to figure that out? What are the steps to figure out where is the location of the path that we are looking for? There are actually multiple algorithms out there that can be used to implement the resolver function. So we're going to take a look at the two most common ones. Okay, so the first one is the URL. Right, so in the URL, you can specify, say for example, you're creating a link tag, anchor tag. You can pass in a URL. And that URL can be a relative path, can be an absolute path, or can be a scheme relative, right? So what are they? Right? So that if you go to this link, urlspec.wartwig.org, you will find out detailed step-by-step on figure out based on the base URL, which is the current URL that you are at, and the specified URL, it will give you the actual URL that you are trying to go to. Right. So I'm not gonna read through the algorithms, but we can take a look at one example over here. So I've created a playground to demonstrate how the URL parsing works. Right. So here I have a anchor tag, and I can dynamically specify the URL to the anchor tag. So here we are at /. So this is the base URL that we are currently at. And if I change this to /a/b, and when I click on the link, you realize that we jump to the AB path, right? And if I click on the link again, now we are at AAB. Okay, so you see that this is the URL that we are specifying. Although it's the same, but it's relative based on the current URL, right? As we change the current URL to AAAB now, you see the target of this URL is different, right? So you can also specify like / at the beginning, and then this will be relative to the root of the whole domain, right? So there is an algorithm that lays out like step by step how to parse the whole URL and figure out where's the final location, right? So this can be thought as one of the resolver algorithm that you can use, right? And in fact, if you look at the specs, the terminology that they use for this resolving function, they don't use the word resolving, but like the algorithm lays out as two inputs. One is the base URL and one is the URL, which is kind of similar to our resolver function, right? The first, we have the importer and the importee, right? So this URL is always relative to where the current URL, the base URL is. Another common resolution algorithm that you would encounter is a node module resolution algorithm. You're very familiar with this if you're using Node.js or you're using any bundles out there. Probably they implemented this algorithm in their resolver. Okay, so let me open up the CommonJS module algorithm for CommonJS. So the general idea of this algorithm goes like this. Right? So right now you're trying to require X from a module at path Y. So here you see Y is the importer, X is the importee, right? You're trying to import X. There's a few conditions. One of it will be, I think these two are more of like an edge cases. But from here onwards, you see that if X begins with a /, a slash, or $/, then you will try to load as a file from YX or load as a directory as Y plus X. Right? If any of this returns, then the whole algorithm will stop and return the result. Right? And if it's not, then you will try to else if this does not match, then you will try to load as a package self or node modules. Right? So in each of this, you can figure out like what are the steps to do. Right? So one thing I want to show you here is that if I load as a file, right, what I do is I will try a few things. I'll try with X and x.js, x.json, x.node. What does that mean? This means that if you are trying to import X without an extension, it will try to figure out whether that file exists or not. If it does not exist, it will try to append an extension. So you will try in order of x.js first, and then .json, and then .node. Right? And if it couldn't find as a file, you see that the next thing is it tries to load as a directory. Which over here you see it will try to look for it will treat it as a directory and look for a package.json as a file. If the file exists, it will look at the main field and figure out based on the main field, right? So in a package.json, you can have multiple fields like the name, dependency, version, and stuff. One of the fields is called main, is where you can specify the main file of this folder, this package. So it does not always have to be in the folder /index.js. Right? So you will try to look for main field and then try to load it. Right? If it exists, if package.json is there, you will try all these steps. And if package.json does not exist, you will try to load index from this folder. Right? So load index is the one that's mentioned just now, which is to try the index.js file in this folder. If it does not exist, you'll try the index.json as well as index.node. Right? And load node modules will be actually figure out all the node paths and then try one by one, each of these directory one by one. And this node modules path it has its own algorithms. Okay, so this is a very detailed document, and I believe if you try to read through them, you should be able to figure them out. It shouldn't be too complex, right? Every steps is defined step by step, what kind of variable you can need to hold and what are things you need to figure out. Okay, and with Node 12 and above, ES modules has become stable, right? So for ES modules, they have a entirely different module resolution algorithm. So like the main difference of it will be probably it does not automatically append extensions anymore. You have to explicitly specify the extension when trying to import from an ES module. And yeah, these are the steps I lay out over here. So if you're interested, you can read through them, right? So let's come back over here. So a summary, you try to resolve a button from a project source index.js file, right? It will try to load as file, load as directory, load as index, right? And it will try to look for files one by one, right? So here are the list of files that it will try. It will try to load for button.js, button.json, button.node. And if it does not exist, any of these does not exist, then probably you'll treat button as a folder. So try to load as directory. And first thing it will check is whether if the package.json is a file. If it's a file, then look for main field and then, right? And if this does not exist, then it will load as index, which it will try button/index.js, button/index.json, button/index.node. And only all the files they have tried and does not exist, then the module not found, right? If any of this is found in any step, then you will return early and end the whole resolution. And if you specify something like a button without a / or / in front, then this will be treated as node modules, which it will try to look for the node modules folder in recursively towards the root path, right? So you look for, I think it's a bit small, but let me try to read it to you. So you will go to project source node modules button to look for package.json and try to load that as a directory, in which you will try to look for different files like button.js, button.json, button.node, and all this thing, right? And if you couldn't find it, then you will look up one level, which is, so the current level is project source node modules, right? You will look up one level, will be project node modules, and try to look for it. And you couldn't find, then you will go one more level, which is the node modules button package.json to find the button folder as a library, as a directory, and try to load it. And if any of this you manage to find a file within any of this path, then you'll return early. If you couldn't find from all this path, then it will be a module not found. Okay, so I think as a summary, there's two common resolution. One is one happens in the browser, which is using a URL. And actually, if you're using ES modules natively in a browser, it actually resolves your module more like a URL, right? You based on the current module script, you will use like a URL parser each kind of thing, where you will figure out where is the file that you're trying to import. But if you are using import or request statement in the Node.js environment, or using a bundler that bundles code from Node.js, then you'll follow this node module resolution algorithm, right? You will implement this algorithm inside. If you take a look at this node module resolution algorithm, you will see that there's a lot of steps, and there's a lot of sort of like a magic constant, right? How do you figure that you need to look for in a folder called node modules? And how do you know like what are the extension you can match, like the .js, .json, .node? Depends on the module bundles you have. Your resolver can actually customize each of these different things. Right, so here are the common options that you probably will find in most module bundles. So the first one is the extension, right? So this extension is the extension that you try on the file if it does not provide an extension, and it usually is in a priority list where you try from the left to the right. Right? In this case, if you want to match the behavior of the node module's resolution algorithm, then probably it's like it tries from JS, .json, and .node in order. And the next thing is the main file. Right? So if we are trying to import from a directory, you see there's this step called load as an index. You will look at the pack folder /index.something file, right? Why is it indexed, right? So no particular reason. It's just dictated by the node module resolution algorithm. But this is something that you can customize if you want to. Okay, so main files is that option, and then why node modules, right? So if you're using other package manager and install it in different folder, then you might want to install it. You might want to specify a different folder instead of node modules, right? So this is the modules, and then instead of reading the main fields from the package JSON, maybe a different file, right? So that you can customize through. Usually it's known as the description files, right? So these options name probably differ from bundles to bundles, but this is the name that I took for Webpack. Okay, so these are the options for Webpack resolver. And let me cover a few more. We have main fields, which is like why main? Why can't you have something else? And then this is something that we didn't cover, but if you dig deeper in the resolution algorithm, you'll find that we try to load as ES modules, package exports in the steps. Then there's two more, kind of like a magic constant, which is the exports field, which is this one, as well as the condition for the exports field, right? So this involves about the package exports, where you can have exports as an object, and then you can specify different files for different conditions. So even if you are importing the same package, depends on the condition, it actually resolve to a different files, right? So how does that work? How does that usually useful for is that you can specify that for browser environment you resolve to this location, and for node environment you resolve to another location. Like if you're trying to load ES modules, then it's maybe resolved to location A, and if you're in a common JS scenario, then you can resolve to location B. One last thing will be alias. So alias is not covered in the step, but the idea of alias is quite straightforward, which is you can specify alias for a long path, right? So next time when you try to import something, if the importee starts with this like a short alias name, then you can replace it with the actual long path, right? That's what alias is used for, right? There's a lot more things that can be configured, but probably we can't really cover all of them. Okay, so let's get back to the resolver function and see how the options fit in. Right, so this is our function, and if you're more of a fan of a functional programming, probably you'll pass in options in here as a third argument, right? So this whole thing is a function. But sometimes because options itself does not really change much, I mean for the whole resolver, like when you try to do one build, the options are usually quite constant, right? It's usually a constant options for the entire build, right? You don't change it dynamically, right? So you can have like a higher order function if you are still very into a functional programming style that takes in the options and return a resolver function that just have like importer and importee. Like if you are more of OOP, right, then your options can be consumed into a class, and then your resolve function can be a method of the class called a resolver class that use these options to figure out the options for the resolver. These two forms are quite common that you can see across different module bundlers. So one last thing that I want to talk about before we end this video, and to talk about it, I think it's easier to illustrate through an example. So take a look at this example over here. We are trying to import a button from components button. So to resolve the components button to figure out where it is, we'll call a resolve function. So we pass in the current location, current file, and then the importee, right? Importer is the source index and then importee is the component button. And so this resolves to a new location, which is source components button index.js. Now we can figure this file, right? It's source component buttons index. Here we have another import statement. You need to take a closer look is that what happens next. What happens next is that we want to resolve for this icon. So we'll pass the function that was the result, which is the source components button index, into the resolve as an importer. Right? So this is the importer and this is the importee. Right? Basically where this file is currently is the importer, and then what you are trying to import is the importee. Right? And then you resolve to a new location, source components icon. Right? But why is that so important? I want you to pay more attention is that what if you have symlinks? So symlinks is like a symbolic link. It's like a shortcut to like a wormhole in your file system. It's a link in a place where it says that this links to that a physical location. You can have like one physical location of the file, but you can have multiple links from within the whole file system. And what the links does is that it's like a wormhole, right? So you can read this file from this symlink as if you're reading from a physical location. And if it's a folder, you can go through and go into the folder itself as if you're entering physically in a physical function, a folder itself. And so say for example, I have this folder structure where I have a few folder, components button and source dark mode button. Okay, so now if I'm coming from here, just now you remember we are trying to import source index, trying to import a button, right? And what if the button itself is a symlink, right? It links to the dark mode button folder, right? So this folder, if you're looking into the button, source component buttons, this itself is a symlink. So it's nothing but a link, right? It's just like a pointer, okay? But if you try to read this source components button, you realize it's a folder because it's linked to an actual location, which is a folder. And if you try to look into source components button, you try to look into the content itself, you'll find files such as index.js, which is not physically there, not physically in this position, but actually it's symlink to here, right? So this is actually, you are actually looking at the content of dark mode, source dark mode button, right? And if you try to read this file, this is still like a wormhole that goes in to point at this file, which is dark mode button index.js. So this is the actual physical location of things, right? So with Symlink, let's take a look. Let's come back to our resolver function again, right? So here, when we try to resolve source index.js components button, we were initially resolved to B, which is the source components button index.js. But this is a symlink, right? This is just a link. The actual position is at source components dark mode button index.js. So should your resolver returns the link like path, or should returns the actual physical location, which is here, right? I mean, I don't have the answer for you, but this is something that you need to take note of, because there's an option for you to turn on or off, basically to say whether you should follow the symlink to go to the physical location or just stay at where the symlink is. Okay, but why does this matter? This matters because later on when you're in that file, okay, I'm not sure which one you resolve to, the content is actually the same because it's a symlink, right? It look at the same content. But when from here you want to resolve for the icons, now the trick happens here, right? So now where are you resolving it from? Are you looking at it from source components buttons index.js or source components dark mode button index.js, right? Because if we're just symlink the button, then the icon may not exist in this location, right? Source components dark mode icon may not exist, or source components icon may not exist, right? Either of them may not exist, right? If the icon is not symlinked, then you may have run into some problems because either one, I mean, where are you trying to resolve from will dictate where this resolver function will return, and that address itself may or may not exist depending where is it from, because Yeah, let me just rephrase, right? So depending on where you're resolving from, where the importer is, then your result from this resolver function will be very different. And then whether that the file is there or not, and that path will really depends on where you are resolving from, right? So which means whether you are going to follow the Symlink or not, right? So that's something that you need to take note of. So I guess that's that's all the things I have to cover in this video, right? So remember, if we get 200 likes in this video, we're gonna try to do a live, not live, but we're trying to do a coding on try to implement our own resolver, and also there's a few more things that probably very interesting to cover, but I'm not really sure whether we have time or enough interest to explore, which is a package manager and like a monorepo setup, right? Why this is interesting and why is it mentioned in the resolver part is that, well, package manager is the one that installs your libraries or dependencies in a place like a node modules folder, in which when you try to require imports, you will resolve it to that location, right? So actually, like this package manager is actually a reverse of resolver. It knows how you resolve things, and then it figure where you should put things so that you can resolve it too, right? So dependency, say for example, you have a dependency called Lodash. You're going to import Lodash, right, from this file, right? So package manager need to know how to store this Lodash folder, this package within the file system, such that your resolver able to resolve Lodash from the place that it's trying to look for. Right, so it's like reverse of resolver to figure out where to put things. There's multiple places to place the file depending on what you're trying to optimize for. Right, so if you are interested to know about this, or you want me to spend a new video to talk about this, well, you know what you need to do, right? Try to write in the comments, and So that's all for this video. So we are in the coming videos, we're gonna talk about resolver in relations with like module bundlers. We're gonna look at actual resolver options that you can do and how you can configure them in a real world example. And we are going to look at how we can write resolver plugins for each of the different module bundlers. Okay, that's it for this video. Remember, like and subscribe. It will do me much favor so that YouTube algorithm knows that this is a great content and it will recommend it to more people, right? So smash the like button. See ya, bye bye.